if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it might just be a duck. Episode 897 of Diz Runs Radio is a quick tip episode. Today's quick tip: what is overtraining syndrome? Hey guys, I don't know about you, but back in the day, socks were always that thing that you got every Christmas, but didn't exactly look forward to getting. And today's affiliate partner / sponsor of the show is Feetures, which actually for us as runners, I think it's safe to say that a good pair of socks isn't the same type of, ho-hum Christmas present as it would have been when we were, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and you got that, 6-pack of tube socks from Fruit of the Loom underneath the tree, and you're like, Santa, can you just take this one back? So if you got, a need for some new socks this year, I definitely stand by the Features socks that I got. I did a review on them not too long ago. If you go scroll back in your feed a few Fridays ago, you want to hear me talk more about the quality that are Features socks, you can check them out there. And if you want to get yourself a pair and support the show at the same time, or maybe put it on your Christmas list, say, hey, order them here, go through the link, dizruns.com/features. That's FEETURES, dizruns.com/features. That throws a couple shekels into the old coffers around here. Doesn't cost you or whoever's doing the shopping for you, doesn't cost them anymore. And you can definitely get yourself some good socks for, starting your year of running in 2021 off on the right foot. Ha-ha, but I'm ching. All right. Anyway, Features, dizruns.com/features today, and definitely stand behind the quality of the socks that they have available. So today, talking a little bit about overtraining syndrome, which is something that I don't think was really on my radar until a couple of things that happened recently. One, there was a question about overtraining and kind of recognizing overtraining syndrome in last month's Q&A episode, which was just a week ago. So on one hand, I kind of have just covered this, but on the other hand, I think it deserves a little bit more deep dive than what I did in the Q&A episode. And also had a comment or a suggestion of a topic to cover on Twitter that wasn't specifically related to overtraining syndrome, but it's kind of going to be kind of the focus of how to work through overtraining syndrome a little bit. So all that to say, I think this is something that's kind of come at me from a couple different areas, and something that, quite frankly, I haven't thought of that much. But the more I start looking into it, the more I started thinking about it, the more I kind of feel like overtraining syndrome is maybe one of those things that doesn't get talked about enough. Because I would wager that there's a decent chance that maybe this is the most common issue. I don't know if you want to call it an injury. I mean, certainly it can lead to injuries, but maybe this is one of the most common things facing us as runners in 2020, going forward into 2021. I think overtraining syndrome is a real thing that is impacting a lot of runners, and as such, worth talking about. And maybe worth having 2 episodes about. Spoiler alert, next week we're going to talk about it some more. So today I want to look at mostly identifying overtraining syndrome. What is it? How do you know if it's something that maybe you might be dealing with? And then next week we'll really dive a fair bit deeper into how to work through it if you think that's something that you've got going on. So a little tease for next week's episode. And, based on how today goes, maybe you'll really be tuning in and taking notes for next week if you feel like this might be something that you're dealing with and something that you need to work through. Certainly something that I think that all of us should be aware of, because I think it's easy to lurk around various corners and creep up on us if we're not careful. So, when you hear the word or the phrase overtraining syndrome, when you hear somebody talking about, dealing with overtraining, what does that mean? And for me, for the longest time, I would have just said that means that probably just running too much, right? At least for us as runners, overtraining, kind of break that down, right? Too much training, too much running, pretty, self-explanatory, cut and dry, move on to the next thing. But after thinking about it a little bit more, doing a little bit more research, doing some reading and some just kind of educating myself a bit further, it's not that simple. All right. It's not super complicated, at least on the, sort of not super complicated, but it's definitely not as simple as you're just running too much. So what would I say a better definition, a better way of classifying overtraining and dealing with overtraining? What would that be? I say that it's less of just running too much, although that could certainly be part of it, but it's more an imbalance in the ratio between your workouts, your training, and your recovery. Okay, because ultimately that's how we improve in the sport, and I feel like I've talked about this before, maybe not as in depth as I could have or should have, but your progress in the sport of running, progress towards your goals, is a basically it's the work you do plus your recovery equals your training equals the progress that you make, and so if those things are in balance, in harmony, if you're recovering enough to adequately that your body is recovered from the workouts you're doing, you're going to move forward. If that balance gets thrown off, and not in the way where you're recovering too much, I think that's an okay place to be. But if it gets thrown off to where the ratio is more training, not enough recovery, that's when potentially you start to go down the path towards overtraining. So again, it's not simple to recognize. And it's not something where every time that you just go a little bit more, a little bit heavier training volume, or a couple of good hard workouts, it's not that simple that you do it a little bit and automatically you're in an overtraining situation. Our bodies are good at adapting, adjusting, making things work. But if over a period of weeks, months, and potentially years, that you're not recovering enough and you're continuing to train more, continuing to push things, maybe continuing to burn the candle at both ends, which we'll talk about that more as we go, that's when you really run the risk of starting to get into an overtraining situation where not only are you potentially setting yourself up for a higher risk of injury, but you also are potentially setting yourself up for a decrease in performance. Actually, instead of moving towards your fitness goals, your running goals, potentially moving farther away from them. And that's the real insidious nature of overtraining syndrome, is that sometimes we feel like, as runners and as endurance athletes in general, that the more we do, the more benefit it's going to be. And as long as that ratio, as long as that work to recovery ratio stays fairly well balanced, there's a lot to be said that the more training you're able to do, the more progress you're going to be able to make. But if you start getting into overtraining zone and real deep into that side of the of an unbalanced equation or an unbalanced ratio, I mean, overtraining can lead to a loss of fitness, a decrease in performance, moving you farther away from a lot of your running goals. So that's why I think that it's important to maybe talk a little bit more about, maybe kind of drag overtraining syndrome out of the shadows and into the forefront, shine a little light on it, and help you identify, like, man, is this something that maybe I'm dealing with right now? Because obviously the first step to overcoming any type of issue is to recognize that you got it, right? Or recognize that maybe it's something you're dealing with. So what are some of the signs and symptoms of overtraining? What are some things that you might want to, kind of recognize that, hey, yeah, like I think I've got that, What are some of those things? So here is a list of, 10. This is in the show notes for today, dizruns.com/897 if you want to check it out. Of course, memes, GIFs, links, the whole nine. But I'm just going to cycle through my list, and this is not necessarily the definitive list. There's probably more things that would fall under this category, but here are maybe the things that I think we could say are some of the most common signs and symptoms of the things that you might experience if you're dealing with a little case of overtraining syndrome. So it'd be increased levels of fatigue, kind of feeling worn down all the time. Increased hunger levels, like always hungry, always wanting more fuel. Elevated resting heart rate. So those of us that track your heart rate, whether it's an Oura Ring, your Fitbit, your Apple Watch, whatever it is, if you're tracking your resting heart rate and that seems to be consistently elevated over time, that could be a sign. Could be a sign. All of these things could be signs, okay? And we'll get to that more in just a second. Other signs and symptoms. An increased awareness or level of consistent muscle and joint soreness. Always kind of dealing with just kind of achy and sore all the time. Maybe you find yourself being a little bit more moody, not just about your running, but in your personal life as well. Snapping at the kids, snapping at your partner, a little bit more grumpy at work. So an increase in moodiness could be a sign or a symptom. Lack of an enthusiasm to run. You just kind of don't really want to. Running becomes a chore, so maybe burnout, overtraining kind of can be synonyms at times. Reduced level of performance. meaning that, again, you're seeing your metrics, the measuring sticks that you use to gauge how you're doing, kind of going down. Maybe your race times, when we live in a world with races again, maybe your race times are consistently getting slower. Maybe you're doing some time trials, or maybe you do some math tests. If you're a heart rate trainer like I am, and you're testing your math test every month or 6 weeks or something like that, and not just here and there that it's the performance doesn't line up, but consistently, test after test, race after race, time trial after time trial, you're noticing that, man, it's moving in the wrong direction. Or maybe you're finding that your heart rate is getting higher to maintain the same level of effort. What felt easy before no longer feels easy. You feel like you're working now, right? So you see some of those metrics of performance moving in the wrong direction. That could be a sign. Increased cravings for kind of junk food, for cheap sugary type of foods. Again, not a guarantee, but if your body's trying to work harder to recover, like it's looking for those easy calories, those things that maybe help give you a little boost, help you feel a little bit less tired, because that's another one. Being tired all the time, even after a good night's sleep, you're just tired all the time. Feel like you could take a nap any day, every day, all day, no factor. Tired, fatigued, which can obviously again lead to some sugar cravings. So those two are kind of tied together. Getting some poor sleep quality, even though you're tired all the time, you're not able to shut it down and get good sleep. You're tossing and turning. Again, if you're tracking sleep, if you wear one of those devices that kind of tracks your sleep, it's pinging at you going, man, another rough night of sleep last night. If that trend starts to pick up, that could be a sign. Another one that's not necessarily related to running, but it's a result of potentially overtraining, is being sick all the time. Always dealing with the sniffles, always dealing with the cold or upper respiratory infections, or I guess flus. In a world of COVID-19, we want to have a good, strong immune system, and if you're run down, if you're dealing with overtraining syndrome, that's going to impact the functioning of your immune system. So maybe and obviously no jokes about COVID-19 or anything like that, but maybe instead of having relatively asymptomatic, maybe if you're dealing with overtraining syndrome, you might end up with a little bit more severe case of COVID-19 if you were to come down with it. Heaven forbid, we don't want that to happen to anybody, but just something to think about in this time and place. Poor, diminished ability of your immune system to function, that's definitely a possible symptom of overtraining syndrome. And then last but not least on my list, just feeling like you're stressed all the time. Just elevated stress levels, which again, 2020, I feel like that's something that again, a lot of us have been dealing with at various points of the year, maybe currently as we're speaking. So that's a pretty good list, but there's other things that could also be on there as well. But one of the things that I think is really frustrating / makes it hard to identify, are we really dealing with overtraining syndrome or not, is that you could make an argument that a lot of these things are just kind of byproducts of good training, right? Like after a good long run, you're probably hungrier. You're probably a little bit tired. You might even be a little bit sore, especially if you maybe after a long run or even after a good hard workout, right? Like with the weather turning, getting cold in a lot of places, even here in Florida, the last few days have been pretty darn chilly. I don't know about you, but that kind of saps some of my enthusiasm about getting out at 5:30 in the morning when it's 37 degrees. And that's not making things up. It was legitimately 37 degrees earlier this week at 5:30 in the morning. I was not enthused. I was not excited to go get my run in, to say the least. So some of these things, you kind of, it's a blurry line. The other trick about identifying or another potential hurdle that has to be overcome to identify whether or not you're really dealing with overtraining syndrome or not, is that a lot of times these things kind of, they kind of fester under the surface a little bit. It's not like just after one good hard run that you're like, man, I'm sore all the time. Like you might be sore a little bit the next day, but that usually goes away after a day or two, right? Like you might not want to run. I might not have wanted to run the other day because it was 37 degrees, but tomorrow it's supposed to be about 50 degrees in the morning. And guess what? That's fine. I'll be okay to go out and run at 50 degrees. I won't have, the cold weather blues going, gosh, I don't know. Like I live in Florida. I shouldn't have to run when it's 37 degrees, 50 degrees. That feels fantastic. I'll be excited to go run. So, all of these signs and symptoms are things that pop up from time to time And they're also things that are kind of to be expected. You know, they're not something that just like, wait a second, what's that? Like, it's kind of makes sense. And then they bubble up. They're gradual onset sometimes, especially the things like, increased moodiness, increased fatigue, kind of being tired all the time. Even the immune system one, where, even no matter how strong and healthy your immune system is, like, you might get a cold, right? That happens. Even with a well-functioning immune system, you might get a cold once in a while. So some of these things pop up, and it's looks like disparate dots, hard to connect them. The secret, maybe not the secret, the advice that I would give you, however, in trying to identify, is this just normal, or is this am I potentially teetering into the zone of overtraining syndrome, is to look at the number of symptoms that you're experiencing. If you've got one or two of the things on the list, maybe. I'm not saying that you definitely don't have, you're not dealing with overtraining at that point. But if you got one or two of those things, like, okay. If you got half of the list, 3/4 of the list, if you were nodding your head up and down going, yep, as I was going through that, well, now, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it might just be a duck. Like, it kind of sounds like, enough positive or enough symptoms that line up. Maybe this isn't just a normal case of I had a good hard workout, right? And then the other thing to keep in mind is, how long do these particular symptoms linger? Like I said, you go out and bang out a good hard quarter-mile repeat workout tomorrow. Shoot, if I go out and bang out a good hard quarter-mile repeat workout tomorrow, I can promise you I'm going to be feeling it for 3 or 4 days. Okay? It's been a long time since I've done a good, hard speed workout. And if I go out and sell out and push myself to do a good, hard speed workout, yeah, there's going to be some fatigue and some soreness that is going to be some lingering for a few days. But if after a few days it resolves, if after a couple more easy runs after that, like, no factor, body feels good, body feels better, back to full health, full range of motion, no aches, pains, nothing like that, probably pretty normal, probably to be expected, probably no big deal. But if I'm sore, feeling worn down, pain in my joints, pain in my muscles, after just an easy 4 miles that I do 6 miles easy pretty much every morning. If I go out for 4 miles tomorrow morning and not pushing the pace, not high intensity, nothing like that, and then the next day I'm like, gosh, my legs kind of sore. Or maybe I just have had a period of a couple of weeks where I've just been running easy mostly, nothing crazy, no crazy mileage, no crazy workouts, but just kind of starting to feel like my legs are heavy all the time. A little bit sore, and it's not going away after a couple of days. Well, now maybe we're getting somewhere. Now maybe we are treading into that, zone of overtraining. So that's kind of how I would look at things. You got multiple symptoms, things that are lingering for days, weeks, maybe months. Pretty good indication that it's not just quote unquote normal. You might be treading more into the world of overtraining syndrome. So how do you work through it? Like I said, this is going to be the full focus of next week. But my little teaser for you is kind of like how my thought used to be that overtraining syndrome just means that you're running too much. My thought used to be that, if you're dealing with overtraining syndrome, just run a little bit less and you'll be fine. That's potentially the solution, because that's going to help balance that work to recovery ratio. But it's not the only solution. And perhaps it's not even the best solution. So we'll dive into that a bit more next week. But if you feel like this is something that you're dealing with, which, again, right now in the world of 2020, increased stress has been kind of a thing for a lot of us for the last 6 or 8 months, right? And that can help to lead to all these things. It can certainly help to reduce our recovery amount, or how well we recover, which could lead to some overtraining syndrome. If that's you, you're probably in good company. In fact, I would say you are for sure in good company. You're certainly not alone. And next week we'll kind of help you figure out how to start working through it, and hopefully help be able to come through the other side so you can really start 2021 in a good place instead of in an overtrained place, in a fatigued place, in a place where running doesn't seem fun anymore. Because that's the last thing that any of us want, I think, when it comes to our running, is for it to not be fun and not something that we enjoy. So we'll be back next week for that. But as far as today goes, signs, symptoms of overtraining. What do you think? Something you're dealing with? Something that maybe I can help you with? Have any questions about it? Let me know. @DizRuns on Twitter, @DizRuns on Instagram. You can also send an email to dizruns@gmail.com. And, of course, you can head over to the show notes today. We've got some memes. We've got some GIFs. Nothing too crazy. I mean, these are ones that have mostly been recycled, but they're some of my favorites. So, if you want to go check them out, you can check them out. Dizruns.com/897 is that link. And, of course, down at the bottom of the page, there is the comment box. So you can leave your thoughts, feedbacks, comments, questions, or, anything else related to overtraining or anything else in general. Just love to hear from you. Let me know down in that comment section. And we'll come back at Overtraining Syndrome next week and try to give some tips and some tricks and some tactics and some strategies to keep training, keep recovering, and work through Overtraining Syndrome. But that's it for today. If you enjoyed this episode, if you think somebody might benefit from talking a little bit more about Overtraining Syndrome and talking a little more openly about it, feel free to pass this episode along to them. Hit that share button on your phone. Post about it on social media. You just post the show notes link, dizruns.com/897. And hopefully help a running friend out a little bit along the way. Speaking about helping a running friend out along the way, maybe even helping yourself out along the way, dizruns.com/features. You like that transition. Don't pretend like you're not smiling right now. Just shaking your head going, Diz, that was pretty good. That's what almost 900 episodes of podcasting will do for you. You'll figure out that transition. But if you want some good socks this holiday season, or you start the new year with, you want to gift some socks to a friend, they'll appreciate it. Again, I mean, as a kid, nobody likes opening socks on Christmas morning. As a runner, as an adult, getting a good pair of socks is not a bad gift at all. And if you're going to get some features, help out the show at the same time. Dizruns.com/features. Again, FEETURES. Dizruns.com/features. Got a link for that in the show notes as well. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. And look at me, coming in at just over 20 minutes-ish. Not bad. Maybe we don't have to rename these quick tip episodes to anything but quick tip episodes. We'll see, though. Because who knows, next week might be a little bit of a longer one. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But until then, y'all, please be well. Take good care. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, y'all, peace.